We start in Gaza, where the World Health Organization says the Strip's largest hospital has come under bombardment. Palestinian officials claim Israeli airstrikes have hit a number of medical facilities, including the main Al-Shifa hospital. Hamas authorities are reporting a number of deaths following the alleged attack. The hospital is believed to be sheltering thousands of people wounded and displaced by war. Israel has said its forces are active near the hospital and alleged that Hamas command posts are located under the hospital buildings.
Our forces in Gaza have reached the heart of Gaza City. They're at the outskirts of Shati. They're near Al-Shifa Hospital and very near to the Gaza port. Those terrorists who are staying in the basements underneath Al-Shifa Hospital tonight can hear the thundering sound of tank chains, the bulldozers that pound the ground. They can hear it underground.
The Israeli Defense Minister there. Thousands of Palestinians are fleeing to the south of the Gaza Strip. Meantime, streams of people are travelling on foot as Israel intensifies its ground and air campaign. Israel has agreed to daily 4-hour pauses in its military operations in parts of northern Gaza to allow civilians to flee through a humanitarian corridor. It's considering the creation of a second passage.
Let's get some analysis now. Joining me is military analyst Frank Ledwige. He's a senior lecturer in strategic studies at Portsmouth University and a former UK military intelligence officer. Frank, Israel continues to reject calls for a broader ceasefire, saying that would be a surrender to Hamas, but it seems it has agreed to pauses in the fighting, at least in the north. Is there a risk for Israel here of Hamas exploiting those pauses to their own advantage?
Well, good morning, Terry. Yes, certainly Hamas would, it's wrong, the Israelis would claim so, but I don't see it as a particularly significant tactical risk. Of course, there are advantages presentationally, and one of the issues that Israel faces, and the US chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said yesterday, Israel could be a little bit more skillful on its presentation. I think that's true, and it might help them in that way. Tactically, there's no great risk. But I think what's happening here, of course, in the wider context, as hinted there, or said directly by Tania, is the hostage issue. And this joshing about ceasefires or pauses or whatever terminology is used is part of a much wider discussion going on in Qatar, in Cairo, and indeed to some extent in terms of policy in DC, as well as Tel Aviv. And within Israel, there are two major parties. And one party in these negotiations is led by Mossad, which tends in these matters to be deeply pragmatic and, let's say, less hawkish. And then there's Netanyahu. And the issue for the negotiators apparently is that Netanyahu continues to increase demands with respect to hostage releases. But, of course, the first issue is to find out how many hostages are really there and who they are. And that's at the top of Israel's demands. So it's a very confusing situation around ceasefires, hostages, and pauses.
The U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has called Israel's aim of destroying Hamas completely a pretty large order. Do you think eliminating Hamas is a realistic goal, Frank?
Well, the goal of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his staff has slightly shifted since the start of the war from annihilating, rooting out and utterly destroying Hamas to eliminating the military capability. I suppose in strict terms, that's doable. But the problem is, and this is what General Brown in Washington is stressing, is it's very difficult to eliminate an idea. This would be my gloss, not his. But whilst killing perhaps civilians in ways that are not properly explained or perhaps even justified. Now, that's a moot question. But there is this information war that underlies much of this. And right now, as Tania hinted, the information being given out, the strategy, as it were, is very sketchy. Now, I think in fairness, we are actually at a very early stage of this war, and one shouldn't demand a full list of objectives and predictions now, but we should be starting to shape them up, and that doesn't seem to be happening.
There's been a lot of talk, Frank, from the very beginning about the risk of this conflict spilling over into the broader region. We heard from the Iranian foreign minister recently warning of an expansion in the scope of the war, saying that was inevitable. Meanwhile, we've got the Pentagon saying that the U.S. and coalition forces have been attacked at least 46 times since October 17th, including in Iraq and Syria, by Iran's proxies, it would seem. Is it too late, Frank, to contain this conflict?
Oh, certainly. We're on an escalatory path. However, there are moderating factors in this. Last Saturday, the Hezbollah leader in Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah, gave a long and detailed speech, the message of which was, we're not going to get involved yet. We weren't involved in the Hamas attack in any way, nor was Iran. So that was a moderating speech, as it were, which certainly slowed things down. But the attack on Erbil Air Base, or airbase near Erbil in northern Iraq yesterday, the dispatch last couple of days of popular militias into Syria to supposedly join the fight. And last night we had reports, in a different domain of what is, in fact, a cyber attack, probably by Israel on Yemen. All indicate that we are on this escalatory path. And I think the Iranian foreign minister, in his leaked words, was trying to message that. And right now, there's no countervailing force. And the US, too, are involved now, of course, militarily in strikes on Syria and, a few weeks ago anyway, Iraq. It's most certainly a dangerous situation, yeah.
Frank, thank you very much for your analysis. That was military analyst Frank Ledwige joining us from Oxford in the UK.
Well, we asked our Jerusalem correspondent, Tania, Krämer, what the Israelis are saying about possibly introducing deadly pauses in their offensive in Gaza.
Well, there seems to be, or appears to be, a difference in messaging here. Israel has not really confirmed it. They are saying this is merely what they already had in place. An army spokesperson briefed reporters on Thursday evening and said very clearly this is not a ceasefire of several hours, but rather that they will be implementing those 4-hour windows. They see it as a tactical pause, as local pauses for humanitarian aid, but also for people, for residents in the north of Gaza to move again south, towards the south, and also that they already have this in place in the past days, that they open these corridors where people are able to move south. Israel has refused, to go for a longer ceasefire or a 1 or 2 day ceasefire that has been pushed for by the US administration, because they say they don't want to give Hamas the possibility and other militant groups there to regroup. So this would be, as far as we understand, implemented in different areas without with a very short notice for people to be able to move or to go out. And of course we need to see if this is actually happening today. And of course fighting is continuing in Gaza City from what we are hearing there from on the ground.
And Shaina Low is a spokesperson for the Norwegian Refugee Council. We asked her whether the introduction of a daily 4-hour pause in fighting would provide relief to the people of Gaza.
Nothing can be done in a 4-hour pause. First of all, these pauses are unilaterally declared. In order for there to be assurances of civilian safety, we need all parties to this conflict to be committing to these 4-hour pauses. But secondly, in terms of the 4 hours, it's not really enough for humanitarians to go and provide assistance. Many of the people stuck in northern Gaza are struggling to flee because they have mobility issues, people in their families with disabilities. There's no food or water in northern Gaza, so people are expected to make this long trek on foot. And it's not safe. When they arrive in the south, they won't be assured of their safety either. This is forcing people out of their homes with no assurances that they'll be able to return when hostilities are over, amounting to forcible transfer, which is a grave breach of international humanitarian law.
And we can talk now to Peter Lerner from the Israeli Defense Forces, joining us from Tel Aviv. Great to have you on the show again. First of all, clarify the situation for us. Are we getting these humanitarian pauses, and in what form?
Absolutely. The idea of humanitarian pauses is to enable people to evacuate safely from the north of Gaza. We've been speaking quite frequently about how Hamas has been preventing it. And by the amount of people that are actually leaving over the last 3 days, and specifically yesterday, some 80,000 people evacuated from north to south, it goes to show that Hamas was preventing people that wanted to take care of their own lives. Indeed, so it is enabling people to evacuate safely, but also if those that want to stay, they can restock if there's a humanitarian pause. It is important to identify that the humanitarian pauses are in specific locations. It's not widespread. It's not all of the northern Gaza. You know, Hamas is deeply embedded and the combat is still ongoing from door to door, face to face in urban combat. So while we are conducting humanitarian pauses in specific locations to enable evacuation of those that want to go, we are continuing to pursue Hamas.
But Peter, over the past days, the IDF has also said it can't secure those humanitarian corridors, fully secure them. How safe then are they for these people wanting to evacuate?
This is exactly very representative of the situation, as the former speaker interviewee on the show just said. When these are unilateral sides, we have no partner in Gaza. There's no governing authority. Hamas has no regard for any life, Israeli or Palestinian. And that's why when we were initially engaging in this humanitarian evacuation corridors, they initially, in the first 2 days, they were firing at these corridors. So, but we did see yesterday that a huge amount of people were evacuating, which is a good thing. 2 days ago, also, we had a huge amount. So it's 50,000, 80,000 yesterday. We are seeing, and I can say that I've seen this morning reports of more evacuation from the northern Gaza Strip. This is a good thing. It's people taking care of their lives. We have been trying to get them out of harm's way now for over 3 weeks. Unfortunately, Hamas was putting barriers, intimidating physical barriers to prevent people from evacuating so that they can reach them and hide behind them.
But at the same time, some of these evacuees are saying that they're being confronted by tanks and by airstrikes.
No, I'm not aware of any, I would say, disruption on the routes that have been designated or from the specific locations where we've said we've conducted a pause. This is I'm not aware of that at all. And I would say, yes, we are seeing en masse huge amounts of movement from people going south, which actually proves the opposite.
So you're saying you can guarantee these people's safety. As far as the timing goes, we heard there from Netanyahu as well, a few hours here, a few hours there, for such masses of people moving on foot. How is it physically possible that they get from the north to the south and safely?
Ben, this is a balance of the war that is ongoing, and it is a war that we are determined to win because Hamas launched their attack against us, and we are determined to remove them from control. So it's important that the humanitarian mission, and we see the humanitarian mission as part of our broader mission in order to achieve that goal. But what is important is to get people out of the way safely. Indeed, when there is gunfights that Hamas are conducting or RPG attacks against our forces, then the forces are required to defend themselves. But I would say that the mass evacuation yesterday of 80,000 people proved that people actually are feeling safer now that Israel and the IDF are mobilized there, because it means that they can get away despite the fact that Hamas is trying to prevent them.
Peter, is there a change in mindset or a change in Hamas control over these people in the north that you can clarify for us?
So we've seen some people that have been, a few people, not too many, that have been speaking out against Hamas. They feel a bit relieved that they can actually say what Hamas was doing to them. I saw a video circulated yesterday from Gaza of a lady talking about how they had threatened to cut open her belly if she leaves. So I would say that is obviously people are feeling a bit more relieved. Of course, the situation in Gaza is not an easy situation. It is a war zone. There is, in specifically the north, where we are uncovering the extent of Hamas's embedment inside hospitals, inside schools, inside residential areas, and how they have created this fortified position out of all of the communities, all of the towns, all of the villages in northern Gaza to serve their terrorist activities. We are seeking them out. We are destroying them stage by stage. I would say we're not in a rush to do it, and we're doing it systematically in a way that maximizes our force protection in order to make sure that we don't have too many inside. And that is why we're moving forward. You know, there are 239 Israelis still being held this morning in Hamas's hands. We are working to bring them home.
And so many civilians who are also being caught up in this from both sides. IDF spokesperson Peter Lerner there, thank you very much for joining us again here on DW. And let's talk more about the humanitarian situation with Hisham, Mhanna, spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Gaza. You're in Rafah, I believe. How severe is the situation at hospitals in the south?
First of all, thank you for having me. And the answer to your question is that it's unprecedentedly shocking, the humanitarian situation in Gaza at all levels. As we speak, we are receiving news that there are hospitals in the northern part of Gaza City that are subject to attacks and violence, which resulted into the injury of medical personnel and the deterioration in facilities and the ambulances. Some of these hospitals are pediatric hospitals, and many of these hospitals do not only treat a large number of casualties of all different kinds, but also it inhabits tens of thousands of internally displaced families who ran to these hospitals as sanctuaries. And, hospitals and medical teams enjoy special protection under the international humanitarian law, and these reports about these incidents imply that there is a disrespect for these principles, and it goes against what the IHL states. We were, as ICRC, on our way a few days ago to reach Al-Quds Hospital, which is run by the Palestine Red Crescent Society. And that was the first time that we tried to reach to the Gaza City after October 13th. We were a convoy of 4 trucks and 2 ICRC vehicles. And while we were trying to reach to Al-Quds Hospital, which is in the southern part of Gaza City, we were under fire, and we had to immediately evacuate the area, and 2 trucks sustained damages, and one of our drivers was injured. We had to go to the Shifa Hospital, which is the largest referral hospital in the Gaza Strip, and it inhabits over 50,000 displaced families. We delivered the aid, and we escorted a number of ambulances filled with injured people to the Rafah crossing. And on the way, we have witnessed thousands of civilians who were trying to get from the north to south of Gaza, walking on feet.
Okay, can I just clarify from you, from whom you were under attack? Who was actually opening fire on you?
We could not verify this so far, but we were clearly visible in that location, and both parties were aware about our convoy.
And what would be the reason? Is there any? Have you seen any evidence of Hamas using these convoys to hide or transport weapons or hide themselves?
We have not been subjected to this before, and it was clear about the perpetrator. What I can confirm is that we were clearly visible in the location. It was nearly only the ICRC convoy moving in that area, and clearly all the roads leading to the hospital were completely damaged, which was for us to find a way through to get to the hospital. But it's a very, very challenging situation that humanitarian situations now have to worry for the safety of their own teams on the ground, while they are trying to get life-saving aid to the hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza who are in dire need for either in the hospitals or in the shelters, or even for the families who are still staying in wonder without any roof over their heads, and without the basic access to essential services, to like water, food, and drinking water. Like people who were walking on their feet, trying to reach to the southern part of Gaza, were asking for some water to drink. I saw myself children, even newborns, carried by their own mothers, trying to cross and get to safety, and they were asking, "Are we gonna live? Are we gonna die? Are there still spaces in the shelters for us? Is there enough food?" And we could not answer these questions, unfortunately. As we speak, there's an ongoing nonstop deterioration in the humanitarian situation in Gaza Strip. And this should not be acceptable and tolerated anymore, any further, because it will definitely result into the loss of civilian lives, destruction of infrastructure, and more hampered, environment for medical teams and personnel to provide life-saving services.
Insights there from Hisham, Mhanna from the ICRC. Thank you very much for joining us there from Gaza.
Thank you.
And let's try crossing now to Adi Koplewitz, a journalist in Jerusalem. Adi, there's fierce fighting around this hospital. Tell us more about what you're hearing.
Well, for starters, I think it shouldn't surprise anyone that the Shifa hospital became one of the targets of the Israeli Defense Forces. We've seen Israeli Defense Forces spokesman Daniel Hagari since the beginning of the war declaring again and again that the IDF has concrete information about not just a couple dozen, but hundreds of Hamas and jihad militants using the hospital as a shelter for military forces. Besides that, we've seen several intelligence reports about the headquarters of Hamas and the control of Hamas' sophisticated tunnel system being located under the Shifa hospital. This is probably the reason that we've seen Israeli forces trying to convince people to evacuate from the hospital since the beginning of the war, and we are expecting to see more and more extensive attacks near the Shifa hospital. Again, the reason for that being that Hamas is using the hospital as its shelter for its own headquarters. This has been the focus of the war since the beginning, and it's going to become a much stronger area of battles as the war keeps on going. This is also one of the main reasons that Israel has demanded the complete evacuation of people from the Shifa hospital and from other hospitals in the Gaza Strip as well. And this is one of the reasons that humanitarian corridors are being opened from the northern part of the Gaza Strip, where these hospitals are located, towards the south of the Gaza Strip, which is considered to be more of a safe zone for people.
Adi, let's get back to the hospital. I've seen some of the evidence that the Israeli Defense Forces have been releasing. Tell me, how concrete is that evidence that Hamas is using places like these hospitals as command centres?
Well, unfortunately, these evidence seem very concrete. I myself went to my sources and confirmed with them that this information is true. And to be honest, I heard a lot more off the record about the cynical use Hamas and other terror organizations in the Gaza Strip are using medical infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. This, by the way, goes way beyond just the hospitals, which on its own is a crime against international humanitarian law. We're talking about using infrastructures such as ambulances to commute Hamas militants and weapons around the Gaza Strip, something that, again, is very contradictory to international humanitarian law. We have to say the consistency of this evidence and how concrete it is probably takes away the legitimacy and the immunity that hospitals are supposed to have under international humanitarian law, because the Geneva Convention explicitly mentions that once these facilities are used as militant bases and as places of combat, as bases for the headquarters for terror organizations, they lose their legitimacy and their immunity in the war.
And let's pick up on the other point you made there, these humanitarian corridors that have been offered by Israel but can't be secured in some cases. And Israel also warning that Hamas has been opening fire on people trying to flee the north to the south.
Yes, and it's not just Israel that has been reporting that. I myself have seen several different Palestinian reports and videos published by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip admitting that they have been trying and attempting to evacuate to the south, and Hamas militants have been shooting not above their heads, but to their feet and to their bodies, killing many Palestinians who are trying to evacuate to the southern part of the Gaza Strip. This is happening because Hamas realizes that the less civilians are around its own militants, these militants are less protected. Hamas is using these civilians as human shields, and the more people who evacuate to the southern part of the Gaza Strip, Israel will have more legitimacy to attack Hamas and jihad targets in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, which again is becoming the main battleground in the Gaza Strip.
Okay, great to get your insights. Adi Koplewitz, a Jerusalem journalist, joining us here on DW. Thank you.